Hello everybody, it's Ron the Meathead Gardener. People have asked me, Ron the Meathead Gardener, you must spend a fortune buying soil for this massive garden that you maintain. And in fact, I don't spend much at all because I'm a composter and I'm also a recycler. And those two activities weigh heavily on the way I make soil. I'm here in my work area, and I wouldn't dare stand here for fear of being carried away by the mosquitoes and getting a terrible case of West Nile virus or something, because this area is normally just a breeding ground for mosquitoes and such. But we've got a tropical storm moving up the coast in Florida, and there's a pretty good northeast wind blowing, and that's keeping the bugs away. So that's good, because it'll be a good time to make a batch. Ingredient to my soil all starts with good aged compost. Now here's my sort of main compost pile. It's about a 3.5 foot circular. Basically it's a hole lined with plastic and fenced off with chicken wire, and there's times where that is chock full of leaves and other debris, but right now in late summer this pile is kind of dwindling down. Use soil right out of your yard. Boy, I wish I could do that, but in Florida it's mainly sand, and sand is this sand here, it has a very high acid content, and it's also devoid of organic material. It's just sand, and it's also a breeding ground for harmful nematodes. So I have to get a little creative, but what I found is along with my compost I do add some peat moss. This is one of the few things I do buy, and this is inexpensive stuff. It's been treated and has no life at all in it, but it's a great extender to the compost. The compost is very rich in nitrogen and has a lot of trace elements. In fact, I think it's too rich for some plants, so I like to temper it and extend it a little bit. So I use the peat moss. I would say to maybe a 3-to-1 ratio, 3-to-1 compost to peat moss ratio. That seems to work pretty well. Now you can see what this 3-to-1 ratio of compost to peat moss looks like. Good stuff. You've seen perlite. You can see it in most of your commercial and your retail potting mixes. I don't add this. I save this just for my house plants. But I do add garden vermiculite. Again, this is not expensive, and you've seen it. It's a real fine mineral, and I just add to a wheelbarrow full. I only add about maybe a quart of this. And the only thing it really does is it acts as, it helps break up the clumps that might form when you are using your soil and it gets wet and it gets dry and it keeps going through the process. It just keeps it from clumping up, and it also allows some air to get into the particles of soil. And it also holds water too, which is a nice feature to have. Again, not expensive. I buy those in, it's a 2 cubic foot bag. I think I paid $9 for it. So not an expensive way to add a nice little amendment to your homemade soil. Okay, so far in my wheelbarrow I've got a 3-to-1 mixture of regular garden compost to peat moss. I'll add about a gallon or so of worm compost. This has more trace elements and it's a little richer than the regular garden compost. This is just a little added kicker. Throw that in there, stir that up real good. In the second container is where I more or less keep the finished compost, and what it is, it's just rich with worm castings. That's the worm poop, and you can just see this is really rich stuff. I don't know if there's anything better that you can put on your plants than just 100% worm cast. Now, one last thing that I add to this is I add lime, because I know that my compost has a very high acid content. I've had it tested many times. I just found by experimenting that to 7 gallons of compost, I've got to add about a half a cup of this dolomite lime. And I'll stir that in. I always say it, but you can get so elaborate that it gets ridiculous. But that's all I do. Now, to my planting holes, whether it's in a container or in the ground or in my square foot garden or in a house plant, I might add, depending on the species I'm growing, I might add some organic blood meal or bone meal. I really like bone meal because this is great for root development, and it's also very good when plants are moving from the growth stage into the flowering stage. Just seems to be a nice amendment. But I won't add a lot of this, just maybe a tablespoon or so, depending on the plant, depending on the container. I throw that right in the hole. A lot of containers and a huge garden, so I'm trying to keep the cost down but make it work. So I just, throw it in the hole a little bit at a time, and you're good to go. Now you can also add Epsom salts. That works well for tomatoes and a few other things, but again, it depends on the species you're growing, and doing it this way to me makes sense because you're being more judicious with the expensive things that you have to buy at the store. The peat moss and vermiculite and that kind of stuff, that costs pennies. In fact, that whole wheelbarrow full, I wouldn't be surprised if there's not more than 50 cents worth of my cost of ingredients in that. Everything else is just, it's all natural, it's all recycled, composted material. You can't beat the price, that's for sure, and it really works great. It's ready. Well, it's not quite a full wheelbarrow full, but you get the idea. I'm actually running low on compost. I have to raid the neighbors in the fall when they rake their leaves and they put them out on the pile. I go through and I get all the bags. I know the neighbors that have the best leaves and the ones that decompose fast. Oak leaves they take a long time, and that's all I have around here is oak trees. So I look for the maples and sycamore trees, those great big fat leaves, those are great. So that's it. That's how I make my soil. Now I should add that I'm a compost tea brewer, and I make that out of my worm castings from my vermicompost containers. And you know, that sort of smooths over any of the rough edges. If I don't really have a real good garden soil, some years I just don't get enough compost. So in the event that that happens, that tea is a great, it's just a great additive, and it brings everything together. Thanks for watching.
Oh.